Welcome to the Fearless Podcast. In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the Fearless Podcast. We are at episode 17.
Episode 17. Yeah.
And we are excited to announce our guest today is Allison Morrow. And for those of you that don't know, Allison has her own social media channels. She is a news reporter, or she was a news reporter, and she still is in, I guess it would now be, I try to think of all the new postmodern terms. You would be alternative media. Allison, would you be alternative media?
I guess I'm alternative. Yeah, I have an alternative lifestyle.
You're like Kurt Cobain, man.
Yeah, the alternative lifestyle turns out looks a lot like the traditional lifestyle, but whatever.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought, right? So the reason I was really excited to have Allison on the podcast is because Allison used to be in like big media, right? Mm-hmm. Allison, who did you used to work for?
My last TV station was the NBC affiliate in Seattle, but I've worked for a bunch of different local affiliates, and I started my TV career for Fox News Channel in New York City. So the big cable network Fox News Channel.
So
I was a producer there, though. I should add that. I wasn't on camera, though. Every once in a while, they like used me for, like, they'd have some spa day or something on 6th Avenue, and they'd make me get a hot rock massage or something, stuff that the anchors didn't want to do. I was forced to go out and do for them as you know, like the prop. But I was a producer there. And then, I went back to graduate school and then got back into news as a reporter. So then I did the local affiliate thing.
So that's why I think this story is fascinating, because you're in this whole big media thing and you're in these very densely populated metropolitan type areas. And then something happened with your career where you kind of changed directions. And maybe you could tell us, currently you are in Florida.
Currently, yeah.
Prior to that, you were in the Pacific Northwest.
Correct. For 10 years.
For 10 years. Okay. And you were in the Pacific Northwest. And then I think you did relocate with the intention of homesteading.
Yes.
Maybe you could give us a little bit of your origin story.
We live in Florida now, where I grew up, but we live about an hour and a half north of where I grew up. And we're out in the country now. We have 10 acres with 2 cows, 2 goats, and 2 horses. And depending on who's behaving, we're not sure which we're going to eat. But
they are incredible.
Yeah, we're brand new to all this. So, as I said to my husband, because he really is ready to eat the cows, he's over them. They cause, I think, the most destruction. And I said, well, let's just wait and see who makes more money on YouTube. Because if Daddy Cow, as we call him, if he could bring in more money on, the social media platforms, then we'll eat someone else's cow. It's kind of like a Charlotte's Web situation right now. We're giving him a year to see how he performs on social media. And like, if he can carry an audience, then he might get to live. We'll see.
Okay. So we have a lot of different interesting factors here. So you were in the Pacific Northwest, and why have 10 acres in Florida? Why have cows? What are you doing? Why are you doing this?
We like quiet. We like to have neighbors that can do what they want on their property, but it really doesn't affect us. That we like that lifestyle. Like, we like to have neighbors that we have relationships with and kind of have the same sort of live and let live mentality. And when I was a reporter, I saw all kinds of situations where you'd buy your little box house and you thought you were living next to a park, for instance, and then the county would come in and say, no, this is a housing development now. And I was like, well, the only way you can really control the land around you is if you own it. So if you have to kind of determine, like, how much space do I need between me and the world in the event the world goes to total hell? How much will I feel like I need insulation to be like, I can get through this? And we were like, 10 acres is basically the minimum. Like, we couldn't afford a whole lot more than that. If someday we win the lottery or, whatever, Daddy Cow, we can maybe the price of beef goes up and we sell him. We'll see. We could buy out our neighbors or something. But for right now, we were kind of like, okay, 10 acres is the sweet spot where it's like, we're insulated enough from just the craziness of the world around us. But, we also can hop into town if we want to. We knew we wanted to be more involved with our food. So in order to have a larger scale vegetable garden, and then also we drink a ton of goat milk. Our kids grew up on raw goat milk, and I'm tired of spending all this money on goat milk. So we're like, all right, we have goats and we want to do the goat milk thing. Our goats do not seem to understand how that all works. The billy goat gets the end wrong on the female goat on a regular basis. So that's like another thing. And so, yeah, I have a video on that channel, on the Off-Gridish Living channel, about like the wrong end sex education that we need for our goats. But that would be like one goal. We would love to experimenting with having healthier food. At this point, we are far away from saving money going to the grocery store. You know how it is. There's so much input when you start these kind of things. So much input. And it takes a long time, I think, but it's worth it. But you have to be in it. 100%. Like my friends who decided they were going to get into meat chickens, I asked them recently, like, do they think they're finally, after 2 years of processing twice a year meat chickens, do they think they finally started to save money? Because they put all this money into like buying all the tools and a lot of it they did on the cheap. They made their own depulucker, the defeatherer thing and stuff. Yeah. And they're like, yes, probably after 4 rounds of killing like 45, 50 chickens, they think that they're now. So they're like, if you just want to do meat chickens one time, it's probably not worth it. But if you're like in it, you want to do meat chickens on a regular basis, you eat a lot of chicken, then go for it. And I think I found the same thing with this homesteading journey. It's just like, you have to kind of stick with it. If you get to the point where it's like hard and you spend a ton of money and you just give up, that's not the right thing to do. You gotta go through it. And then I do think there's light at the end of the tunnel, but not yet.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it kind of should be hard. And, that's kind of the interesting part of social media, because so many, homesteading is quite the genre on YouTube and social media. And it is very much curated, and filtered and Instagrams and, and then there's a small handful of people that have been able to substantially monetize it. And all that glitters is not gold. There's a lot of filters and creation there. And this speaks to this fact of it is hard work. There's poop involved and it gets on your shoes and your hands and stuff like that. And it is a try, fail, adjust period. And, we've been trying to grow this beef business, and we've made some poor financial calculations because we're trying to buy cows and trade cows and find cows, and we're working with our community and different people that we know. And then, you look at a cow and you're like, this cow weighs 1,200. So there's lots of estimation. Well, the proof that happens is when they hang the thing and cut it. And then you're like, okay, well, now this is what the cow really is. Now we made a lot of assumptions up to then, and there was dollars directly tied to those assumptions. Yeah. And now we have to deal with the consequences of what the gross hanging weight is and how this thing flushes out. So it is an absolute, but that's all part of the learning process, right?
Yeah.
And as long as you're learning from it, it really wasn't a mistake or an error.
No.
You learn through it, and okay, well, next time we know that if we do this and that,
correct.
We can. So it's the same thing with every aspect of growing your food. It's the same thing with every aspect of life. You're trying, failing, adjusting, you're falling forward, and you're learning as you go. And it is absolutely incredibly difficult and challenging. And it wasn't more than 100 years ago where high quality food would cost us roughly 80% of our annual income, and this illusion of cheap food is all been a construct of China, right? Donald knows.
China.
So it's partially because of China, which is from, Tragedy and Hope and Heinz Kissinger and Brzezinski, and they put together this low price model, export everything to China, drive the cost down, bring it back here. We can sell it on the cheap. This way we can manipulate big ag. What's fascinating with this whole meat process and being so intimately and actively involved, even with there's so much grass here in Texas, there's so much pasture, and these people are raising these cows on pasture. But we still get to see all the inputs and the costs all the way across the board. And even if you're raising the cow yourself, now it's grass fed, so it's a much higher quality product. But there's our costs are still higher than what you can buy a mid to premium range per pound beef in the store.
Yeah.
And so when you see this cheap beef in the store for like $4 a pound, which that's not even super cheap, you're just like, how in the world they must be buying this beef at 50 cents a pound. They must be butchering it 50 cents a pound. And how are they even doing that? It
Super
really,
CAFO.
It really helps you to get an idea on also all of this subsidies and everything that makes this even a possibility, and once you start digging the garden and raising the animals, you're like, wow, this requires work, and this is a process, and there's a lot to this. And how have they been able to mechanize this to make it so cheap? And the reality is it's not, you pay for it one way or the other.
Yeah, right. It's the way that the crowd flows is typically because there's some kind of incentive to do so. So you're right, with agriculture, it's good to look into, why is it the way it is? And it's not just because consumers don't care, which is part of the problem, that a lot of consumers just don't care. But you're right. The government subsidizes the way that we look at the conventional model at this point: cheap, big, fast.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I was just hearing something about the EPA going after Berkey water filters or something like that over pesticides. And I'm like, the EPA doesn't care about pesticides. They think Roundup is totally fine. Since when do they care about pesticides? So the federal agencies that say they're the Environmental Protection Agency or the U.S. Department of Agriculture, that these, a lot of them, may not actually have the environment or agriculture really as like their number one priority. It may be money or I don't know, the social health control. So, because I don't know, I think agriculture probably is what led to the beginning of the end of my career in news, since I started covering it in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was my second TV career or second TV job. I had started out in Macon, Georgia, a tiny little station, moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I just started doing farm interviews because it got me out of town, and it was pretty. The scenery was pretty, and the animals were fun. And there was an interview I did about electronic ear tags in cattle. And I just asked this very simple question to the rancher about why electronic ear tags. And he explained that it was so if there was a foodborne illness outbreak, they could trace it back to the cow at the feedlot. That's the term he used, at the feedlot in Iowa. I'll never forget that. We're in Tennessee, and he said they can go to the feedlot in Iowa where this cow goes and trace back if the E. coli or whatever comes from this cow. And I had no idea what a feedlot was. I had never heard of that before because I thought cows were always on grass. I mean, every picture I saw, every movie I watched, when I drove down the highway, I saw cattle on grass. I just thought that they all lived that way until they were slaughtered. So I didn't know what a feedlot was. And I also had never seen a feedlot. They're kept from view from a lot of people, and they are in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, in places like Iowa or Kansas and Dust Bowl areas where nobody wants to live and there's no water, and which is a weird place to have tons of animals. But anyway, that's why then you have mass deaths like we saw. What was that last year?
Yep.
Anyway, that made me start looking into what was going on. And it taught me not only about food specifically, but generally speaking, propaganda about how, I mean, I was totally doing the mouthpiece reporting for these big agriculture special interests without even realizing it. I remember one time I did a story about canola, these, huge fields, monoculture canola. And I was just having fun. Like, I popped out of the canola field and I was like, it's catching drivers by surprise because it's yellow as far as the eye can see. And I saw that it was so pretty. I had no idea like what GMO canola was and what it was being sprayed with and how it's, creates these inflammatory seed oils for people and it's terrible for you. I mean, I didn't know any of that. I was just, they didn't tell me that. They just showed me these little blue seeds and this is going to be great for farmers. They're going to make extra money. And I just didn't know anything. And so I just started looking into that. And I realized now looking back on it, here I was, I just thought if I got the press release from the university extension agent or, from the government office of some local agricultural or state agriculture office that this was fact. And I can't tell you how many years it took me to finally realize how complicated this is and how much money there is involved. And then by the time I finally not even got to the bottom of all of it, but just realized how complicated it was and how little I knew that I could never get to the bottom of it in TV news. Like, I was like, there's no way in the system that I'm in, I'm ever going to really know what I'm talking about when I go on television, but I'm going to be pretending like I do. And so once I finally transitioned from ignorant to liar, basically, because here I was now going on television. It was one thing when I was telling you the truth, but I was just an idiot. I mean, that's what's the old saying? Better to shut your mouth, keep people guessing if you're an idiot rather than open your mouth and prove it. so anyway, I realized like I'd crossed the line now, into the world of now at least I had awareness, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I started picking stories that at least I knew nobody really cared about. So there wasn't going to be a whole lot of politics or propaganda money involved in it. And so I would just do these dumb little stories. And here I was, I had won 2 Emmys. I had done these environmental reports for like years at this point. I was capable of doing a lot more than I was doing, but I refused to go down any more complicated paths because I knew I didn't have time to really do the research I needed to do. And so I was just like, I'm not going to just keep doing these like brainless, mindless stories anymore, even though every once in a while I got to do a really cool shoot. Like, I'd go out and I got to be on research boats looking at killer whales. I got to do stuff that very few people, if anybody, ever get to go do. Hike to find wolverine dens. I mean, it was a great adventure. And a lot of it was really fun and I really enjoyed it. But like when it came to the stories about the Clean Water Act, for instance, and I started to realize how politicized the Clean Water Act is. And it's not just if you hate the Clean Water Act, you just hate clean water. But it often gets sold to people that way. And it hurts small farmers in a lot of ways. It hurts the little guy. And I started to see that. But I had 2 hours a day. I didn't have time to read Senate reports that I needed to about the Clean Water Act. I had to take whatever person called me back first. So it may not have been the best person, but it was, love the one you're with. I mean, that was the TV news business. And so eventually I was like, I'm done. And I think part of my interest in homesteading is really twofold. It's number one, it's like, I know now as an environmental reporter what's out there, and it's not often what we hear about in the mainstream media. Like their narratives about the environment, we're going to all be underwater in 5 years or something. I almost wonder if that's purposefully deceptive for people because there are serious problems. There's chemicals in our water, the soap you're using, all this stuff that you could actually change. Like today, you could actually make a huge change for our natural resources and your body and your family's health. Sitting watching CNN talking to you about how your house is going to be underwater in 5 years and you're going to do absolutely nothing, or you're going to drive an electric vehicle that also has a damaging impact on the environment. And then, so it's basically saying to people, look, you can actually take real steps. Like I care very deeply about our natural resources and the environment. I don't hate the environment at all. My leaving television actually was a direct reflection of how much I care about our natural resources. And I'm living this way is because I want to be able to have, transparency along that route of like, source to table. I want to see all of that. I want to be able to participate in a healthy way and show people that you can do it. I'm not just going to be a mouthpiece on television anymore. I'm going to actually do it and show that you can do it. And then the other thing too is, because it's so complicated, like this information war that I cover on my other podcast. I have the Allison Morrow podcast where I do all the news interviews that are focused on censored people and censored ideas. And then I have the homesteading channel, which we just try to have fun with. But on the news podcast, it's very obvious that it's near impossible to get to the bottom of many, if not most, of these topics that are just getting thrown at us every day. And you could spend the rest of your life on the internet trying to figure it out. And I don't think you ever really will. And your whole life is outside waiting for you, or inside with your family, whatever, but you can actually do something. Like, you can watch a seed grow. You can look at what an onion seed looks like, and you can see how small it is, and you can put it in, a little starter, and you can water it, and you can figure out how much is too much water and how much is too little water, and you can see what works and what doesn't work. And then you can grow it, and you can eat the onion. And it's good for you. You actually can know that, you can know something. So I'm like, well, why wouldn't I spend more time on something I can actually know? And so it's about health and natural resources, and also just wanting to be involved in what I think we can really know in this world, which is just the basic elements of survival, really. And food is obviously one of them.
Yeah, that's what attracted me to permaculture. Bill Mollison, he's got tons of quotes, but he said permaculture is sedition, because just like you were saying, all of these different issues are incredibly complex and complicated. And unfortunately for us, our two-party uniparty system of the red team, blue team, Hegelian dialectic, it's like, well, us Democrats, we love the environment and we're pro-environment. And they used to be anti-war. I don't know where those guys went, but, and then all the Republicans are like, yeah, but businesses need to make money, so they should be allowed to pollute or whatever. Or, it's just always, it's so cut and dry, and it's actually not. It's incredibly complex. These issues, clean water is a very complex issue. Big ag is an incredibly complex issue. And all of the solutions from the uniparty are basically to destroy the little guy, eliminate the little guy, consolidate, make it so fund multi-transnational trillion-dollar corporations so that they can become even bigger and stronger and more industrialized and more processed, and then ignore it when they pollute the river, and it's such a, when you're looking at it from a political and kind of like a news stream perspective, it is, in my opinion, hopeless. Because it's a stacked deck, and they make all the rules and then they enforce them as they see fit, versus if you are in control of growing your own food and you're involved in the process, you're taking personal responsibility to one, I want to eat an onion, so I'm going to plant an onion. I'm going to nurture the onion. I'm going to know every aspect of what goes into that onion. I'm going to know what kind of water that onion was watered with. I'm going to know what kind of soil. And this way, when I harvest that onion and eat it, I'm going to know, relatively speaking, exactly what's in it. And that's being engaged in the process. And that is absolutely something that anyone can do without even a college degree, and the college degree comes in with all this hard, expensive stuff you're talking about, is to try, fail, adjust, and it takes, 2 to 10,000 hours to be an expert. And when you want to become an expert in these fields and you're doing it in real time, it's going to require time, effort, and resources. And it's so exciting to see other people, joining this, what Joel Salatin calls this homesteading tsunami. They see all of these issues, right? And rather than be many people, they're like, oh, it's all terrible. And I live in an apartment. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to vote harder, and somebody eventually will come along that can fix all this, versus no, let's take responsibility today. Just like you were saying with soap. Hey, let's get a soap that's not going to kill us, that's not going to pollute the water, that's not going to like damage the trees. Let's focus on that. And once we implement that, we personally resolve that issue for us, for our family. So now I can be like, oh, well, at least the soap we're using isn't poisoning us as a family. It's not polluting the water, because, you know, we reclaim our gray water and use it to water a lot of our fruit trees. So, you know, rather than self-sabotaging, you know, and we would be what the general people would be, like this conservative Christian large family, you know, but yet we care about God's creation and the environment very much so, because we don't want to poison ourselves. You know, it's like,
Right, yeah.
I don't know how that whole like, and that's like the same thing with all this war drumming and Ukraine and all this stuff. It's fascinating how there is like this cognitive dissonance. But circling back to homesteading, and you were telling about your experience and different things that you reported on. Was there any one thing in particular? Was there maybe, a lot of people say, oh, we watched this one documentary or what? Is there any one thing you can maybe peg that to where when you saw it or you experienced it, you're like, you know what, we need to be proactive in growing our own food? Is there any one particular thing you could pin that to? Or was it like a collective kind of thing?
Do you remember anything? I'm asking my husband if I rant a lot, so he probably has a hard time remembering.
I remember one of the first things that you talked about was when you were doing the story on the dairy farmers in Washington.
Oh yeah, that was one.
That was one of the big tipping points for you.
There was a dairy farm that was switching to all robot milking, and their pitch for it was that this way the cows can just go get milked whenever they want, and you don't have to worry about a person actually doing it. I guess given the model of a large scale mass dairy farm, that probably makes more sense, honestly, because they're not making hardly any money on milk, and they have to hire all the staff to do it, and the cows are, you know, in a mess. I mean, they live in a mess. But the interesting thing that I thought I took away from it was they handed me a press kit with a cow laying on grass in like a, you know, a bunch of dandelions around it. And there were no cows living that life where I was. And I'm thinking, okay, like this is what they want all of us to believe.
Not reality.
And I'm looking at what is. And that was just a moment where, I mean, I knew what was happening at dairies, at a lot of dairies. And I mean, I had, at that point already, I was drinking raw milk from people I knew. So it wasn't like I was like, oh my gosh, I have to, you know, I want to switch. Yeah. But what's interesting is I came back and my boss read my script and he was like, wow, another moment where like big oil and the lack of like humans interacting with their food gets another win in agriculture. And I thought, yeah, I mean, that's kind of true. And this story is not critical enough of that. It's just like, look, there's going to be robots milking the cows, you know, AI cows or whatever. But what's interesting is he was able to see that. This managing editor of mine was able to see that, and we agreed on that. And, you know, unfortunate is because he and I both had a real affinity for like local farms and everything. But fast forward, it was the same manager who, when I said, hey, there's a conference of doctors coming to question the mandates for elementary, well, not just elementary, but school vaccination schedules and the requirements, because Washington State was going to take away the philosophical exemption for kids and the vaccines in Washington State. And all we would ever do was like interview the Department of Health spokesperson and pit that person against like a mom. And it was very, I mean, not just to say it was an unfair fight, it wasn't even interesting. It was not interesting to me as somebody who really wanted to understand this issue, who didn't know anything about vaccine science. It was not interesting to me to see a woman at a protest saying like, you know, I should have the right to choose for my child, and then listen to then a 5-minute interview with the Department of Health spewing all kinds it was propaganda at the time, but I just knew that these two were not equally matched. What I wanted to hear from was another doctor. So there was this doctors conference coming in for Informed Choice Washington to support the protests to maintain the exemption. And I had never heard of this before. I never knew. So maybe this is one of those moments. I never knew there were doctors that questioned the CDC vaccination schedule. Or vaccines at all. So I saw that and I thought that was interesting. I was an environmental reporter. I was not going to cover this conference or cover this topic at all. All I did was forward the information about the conference to my boss, who agreed with me about big agricultural, issues, and my assignment desk and the health reporter, and said, hey, maybe this would be a good way to cover this issue because there will actually be doctors there. And it would be interesting to hear them talk about what the Department of Health says when they constantly come on our TV show and tell everybody to get the flu vaccine. And my boss called me, smart, he didn't put this in writing. He called me and said that the fact that I would even think that it is interesting is a sign that I am untrustworthy on the topic of vaccines, and I am never allowed to discuss vaccines in the newsroom ever again. Not even cover them. I'm not allowed to turn to Susie sitting next to me and go, hey, Susie, did you hear that they have the flu vaccine is not effective or whatever? I'm not even allowed to say that. I wasn't even allowed to have lunch conversation about it.
Wow.
And yeah, so it was really, it really took me back. Number one, so I learned two things. I didn't know there were doctors who question vaccines, and I didn't know there were news managers who would not allow you to question vaccines. And that really said, okay, well, you need to go to the conference because you got to figure out what's going on here. And yeah, do you know Dr. Zach Bush? Have you heard of him? He's brilliant.
Yeah, he's awesome. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had heard of him through actually, I believe a coworker who would love Zach Bush, but also be kind of the mindset of my boss, which is, yeah, we love Zach Bush, but not when he goes there. And I don't think they probably thought that he was one of these doctors, but he was going to be at the conference. And he actually was nice enough to sit down with me and my husband. We did an interview with him for the other YouTube channel, and he was just great. But it's this guy has, he's triple board certified in total mainstream medicine. And he's not not that there's anything wrong with going out and doing yoga on your yard. I do that all the time, but he's he knows what he's talking about. To say this guy doesn't have the, I'm not an idiot. I knew that there was a reason this guy's practicing medicine. He hasn't had his license taken away yet, So it was that was really interesting to me to see, going back to that dairy story, where you could have a boss, like you were saying, where are the hippies that were anti-war? What happened to them? I don't know. My boss was probably one of those guys. And all of a sudden, he could see the big corporate control or government control, in negative ways in this one instance. But when it came to this other topic, it was you could not ask questions about it. And that also was very telling. That was probably really became the beginning of the end of my career. I was already leaning in that direction, but when that happened, I was okay. Because then he told me too, Allison, it's not I would let anyone, talk like that about climate change, trying to tell me that was a good thing, because he thought I was all in on the narrative too. So he's it's the same thing. He's would you like it if I let somebody come on and question climate change? I'm well, if they knew something I didn't know, that was a good question to ask. Yeah, I am interested in that because I care more about the truth than feeling safe and secure in, some particular social strata as a journalist. Anyway, it was during our I Stand for Truth campaign, which was really funny because we got these t-shirts that said truth seeker on them. And I wanted to add to the back of mine, accept vaccines and climate change.
Yeah. Wow. That's some serious propaganda. That's pretty interesting.
But believe me, he really, he's still a manager in the news business, not at my old station, but he really believed with the telling the truth, and he was doing the right thing. And that's what I tell people a lot of times about people in the news business. The average worker bee, drone, stormtrooper is not Darth Vader. They are not the planners. They just are executing the orders, and they don't know. I did not know. It took me years of covering one beat, which most reporters don't get the chance to do. Most are pushed around on health one day, crime another. And so they just don't gain the competency to start seeing the dark shadows of what they don't know. Not all of them ever do, even when they have that opportunity, but most of them are just like factory farm information workers. I mean, if we're talking about factory farms, right? The news business is, I think, intentionally kept like a factory farm of information, and it's crap information, just like a lot of the food you get, when it's processed like that too. And they are believers. They're not sitting there thinking like, I want to get paid 90% by Pfizer for this 6 o'clock newscast, and so I'm not going to question it. Now, maybe the money subconsciously pressures them. I mean, there is probably a strong subconscious pressure for us to be socially cohesive, but they don't think that. And that's why I was telling you, I transitioned from one of those people that was just ignorant and like thinking that I was helping the world to realizing that, like, no, if I keep saying this now with my awareness, now I am a liar. And like, I can't do that because I got into journalism to tell the truth, So that was the end of that. Oh, yeah. Well, my husband is reminding me that when I took over the environmental beat, Gary Chittum, gotta love that guy. And he was back in the era where they used to fly him in a helicopter to his stories, because we had a helicopter, and they would fly him in a helicopter, and he would get days to work on his stories. And one of the reasons he quit was because he didn't want to work like I did, which was shoot his own video, be done in 2 hours. I mean, he knew better. And so he saw the writing on the wall, and that's why he was getting out. And then I took over, and he was nice enough to drive me around one day to meet some of his contacts so that I would have people to call if an issue came up. And I said, Gary, I just done this whole special report on religion in Seattle and atheism and, the mess of religion and that kind of thing in Seattle. And I said, Gary, I'm so happy to finally be done with something controversial like the religious beat and go to something fun like the environment. And he was like, he was like, yeah, just wait. Because I was like, at least if the environment's not political. And then I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Wow. So now y'all have relocated to Florida. Now, why Florida? Was it just because you grew up there, or?
Partially. I think we like the weather. My husband likes the firearm laws here. My parents live here. My friends from growing up live here. We can drive to North Carolina to visit his family where they live. I think with young kids, he travels quite a bit for work to train law enforcement. He's a human behavior expert, so he does a lot of law enforcement training. And the winters, like shoveling snow and being stuck in the house. And our kids eventually will be old enough that like you can go do snow sports and stuff with just like mom taking you to the mountain. But that's not in our like immediate future. And I was just like, I think I just need a beach sabbatical for a few years at the very least. Like, who knows if we'll do it forever, but like, I just need some warm weather where the kids can run around. Our 3-year-old, she is like a wild child. She has so much energy. And so it's just nice because like it's warm here. I know she's not going to get hypothermia. We just like run around and hang out with the goats and we're good. And then just to have the family support, I think, and friends too, like in case of an emergency, I think those were probably the 2 top choices. And not to mention like, Washington at this point, I don't know how parents are staying and fighting in Washington. I mean, I know they are, and I know there are people with very good intentions there, but at least this recent law where if you don't affirm your kid's gender choices, like your young kid wants to go get surgery or hormone blockers or whatever, it is now elevated to abuse because they can use the same law that they had before, like the shelter law that was used for abuse, where like they don't have to tell you if there's allegations of abuse, the shelter doesn't have to tell you where your kid is. Well, they elevated this choice now to abuse. So, not just that, but like, what's the next thing? I mean, we're thinking like, okay, what's the next thing? You don't get your kid vaccinated for COVID. That's child abuse, and they can not tell you where your kid is. I mean, and some people think that's crazy, but I just don't. I think the writing's on the wall there. So it was just like, we're not staying here.
Yeah, we'd moved 10 years ago. And at that time, my wife and I were having lots of discussions. And I said, I see all this weaponization of the state. I see it, and this was 10 years ago, so this was way before 2020. But I'm like, I see this balkanization process where our country is going to balkanize along ideological lines, and I think we're watching that flesh out. And nowhere in my wildest dream did I think it would have anything to do with some virus or whatever anybody wants to think, whatever it was, or whatever you can actually say it was or wasn't or whatever. But I certainly didn't think that it would be about that. But the fact that it was, and it just hardened those balkanization lines. And we're watching this mass migration of people that just kind of, want to be left alone. You mentioned the firearm laws. We want to be able to protect ourselves, defend our family. And in large part, we want to be left alone. We want to be able to raise our children the way that we see fit, because God gave them to us, and they're not a global citizen. They're not a member of the state, but they're a member of our family, and we want to raise them. And in this process, we want to try to raise our own food. We want to have less regulation around that, so that we just have the freedom and the ability to do that. So that a lot of the reasons that you moved are the same reasons that we moved, was just for the sake of just having a little bit of room. For us, it was the cost of land in the Northeast was incredibly high. And we're like, well, if we move here to Texas, at the time, it was a bargain. It's no longer a bargain.
No,
but
same with Florida.
Texas and Florida are really two very much similar in most aspects. So it's very interesting how, and we have lots of friends in Florida.
So one thing that's still keeping some of the prices where we are, because we're not like on the water. I mean, we're not far, but we're not on the water. And a lot of people who move to Florida, like, they want to live close to the water. So those prices are insane. At least where we are. I mean, granted, like, if we had bought this place even 3 years ago, we may have paid half of what we paid. And that's how crazy it is. But at least the prices, it's funny, it's still a lot less than if we had bought this property in Washington State. We would have still paid probably another $150,000, maybe $200,000 more. So it still was cheaper, because people haven't yet. The homesteading thing in Florida, though it is getting more interesting here, like for that, it's not like, I think Texas is still more of a hot spot for it. And Floridians are still kind of like, I want to be a beach bum, like, I want to be left alone, but I don't really want to do anything else. Like, that's I was wondering, like, why did Florida become this revolutionary leader during COVID? Because I grew up here and I know Floridians don't care about pretty much anything. So I was like, what is it? And I realized, it's exactly that. Like, they're not going to care about whatever your activism is. Like, it used to drive me crazy that I would walk the beach and there was trash everywhere and I had to pick up everybody's trash. On the other hand, it's also awesome that, like, when, the CDC director, or like the celebrities were getting on Instagram and telling you to get your COVID shot, Floridians were also just like, F you. I don't care. I just don't care. I don't want to wear a mask because I just don't care. I'm not going to be part of your campaign. And so I think that's a Floridian thing. I mean, if you're in Florida and you disagree with me, please let me know. But I do think the homesteading thing is picking up here. Like, I just called this guy the other day who does permaculture assessments for properties, and he's in Central Florida, and he has like a permaculture group. And since there's like a lot of people that are starting to get really interested in that in Florida, because you can have a pretty long growing season here. And it's just a matter of, like, in Central Florida, like I said, the land's not that expensive yet. I mean, it's a lot more expensive than it used to be.
It's not Pete at Green Dreams, is it?
No. He actually has a biochar company, PK Biochar, really? But I can't remember the guy's name. But he specializes in biochar, but he expanded into like permaculture, generally speaking. So he'll like come to your property and say, like, okay, this is how I would set it up.
Great. Cool. Yeah. What's funny is, because we considered Florida, and I'm from the Northeast, and I'm like, I don't want to move to Florida. It's just a bunch of retired New Yorkers.
Yeah, right. A lot of them are. Well, near the water. That's true.
Yeah. I'm moving away from New York because I don't
Yeah.
want to deal with those people. So I'm going to move
Yeah.
to Texas.
Yeah. But like every once in a while, yeah, you'll meet somebody in Florida that you're like, okay, it's catching on. And I noticed that with my dad specifically. I mean, both of my parents are really into food now. They're both doctors, but my dad was definitely the one who did the deep dive and is the guy who's now, I mean, he's got a tiny little house on the beach, and my mom and he had like use every square inch for making bread and making wine and like doing their own thing. I mean, they're little like beach homesteaders, I guess, in their tiny little house. But as a doctor, he realized just how much he had been lied to in his medical education and how much nutrition matters to, like, he was an orthopedic surgeon, or he still is, and people would come in with pain and he just would do steroids or surgery. Like, he never knew about inflammation related to diet. And anyway, he's totally down the rabbit hole now. And where they live, like, I noticed, he has, like, we buy from her. He has his raw goat milk supplier, and he has the grass-fed beef guy. And so I knew that we could make it work here, like, because my dad and mom have been able to slowly over time find farms that they can buy direct from and do this life. And so even though they don't do the farming themselves, my dad's like he's a big supporter now of
awesome.
Farm starts, and making sure that those survive. So we were like, well, we could do it in Florida because we know that my parents are, they're getting food from these kinds of people. So they do exist,
Yeah.
and why not get in on it while we're still unique?
And that was what I was saying was one of the benefits of the COVID lockdowns and the ephemeral supply chains is it's going to make healthy food and raising and selling healthy food. It's going to make it more profitable because it may or may not be the only food available, and people will always have to eat, hopefully. And, so it's going to, and then as this food goes up, one, it's going to make it profitable to sell, but two, it's going to make it more profitable to do it yourself as well. Cause you're just not going to be able to get it.
It just was making me think, like, I went to the farmer's market here the other day and there was only one person selling produce, and it was, because I asked him, I'm like, I'm not to say like it needs to be labeled or anything organic, or you have to be certified, but do you spray with like herbicides and pesticides and stuff like that? And he was like, yeah, it's totally conventional. And I was like, wow, there's not one person here who can tell you like we didn't spray the squash with. So I'm like, dude, we got to get in this market. I mean, it is. It's an opportunity.
Yeah,
I got to actually be able to grow something though. Right now, the squirrels are winning this game.
This is a challenge. That's why we've given up on vegetables and we only eat meat now. So
I can understand that. Well, I'm putting this out there. My dad has said he would pay for us to build a greenhouse. So Dad, if you're watching this, it's now on the record, and hopefully we can secure that and keep the critters out.
Yeah, that definitely helps. Greenhouse. Being able to control our greenhouse, it was such a game changer. And where you can just climate control it, you can keep the critters out. You can control the amount of water that everything gets. So when it's dumping, it's not getting flooded. And then, a greenhouse is, and there's so many of these neat, cost effective, like ours is a bootstrap farmer. So it's a DIY kit, but, they're a little challenging to put up, but I would definitely pay somebody to do that. But, a greenhouse is a game changer.
Could we figure out a way to do it so that like you have like a loft Airbnb and you sleep above the vegetables or something, and then we can make some passive income, like sleep in a greenhouse.
There you go. Now our friend Carrie at Homestead How, they have an Airbnb on their farm, and lots of homesteaders are doing this farm experience, this kind of micro living, tiny house Airbnb thing where you can kind of get the experience. And it helps monetize and pay for everything. There's a lot.
We live in a very like local tourist friendly area. We live near where the manatees swim up the rivers in the wintertime. And so people love to come swim with the manatees. And how that's possible, it's only because it's Florida, because in Washington State, they would never let you swim with an endangered species, but it's cool because they want to protect them. So anyway, so that's a big draw. And then also scallops, local scallop season. Like actually, this is very interesting. Scallops, I found out, are so vital to local tourism that you can't get commercially harvested scallops. They're only allowed to be harvested by resident or, people who buy a license. I don't know what's up with that, but
That's neat. Okay.
Wow.
interesting. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
very
what I thought,
interesting.
like for scallop season, manatee season, like let's do something like that.
That sounds great. I think you could totally pull that off.
Mhm.
Pull a little tiny house there, plop it down, and then help monetize that thing. That'd be great.
Yeah.
And then your greenhouse is basically a lawn ornament for the rental property.
Correct.
So you have multiple tax deductions there. And
Yeah.
But no, that
it's
sounds
just
great.
Back to the beginning of our conversation, it's just that input,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, my wife and I's idea is like, we'll have a bunch of kids and we'll teach them how to work really hard, and then they'll do all of it,
Yeah.
It's paid off pretty well.
Yeah, so far so good.
Kids, I mean, honestly, it's true. Kids are also kind of like back to the meat bird thing. It's like you really do need to do a lot of it to get your money back.
You do.
'Cause if you just have like us, we only have 2. I'm kind of like, I think we need to do more to get like return on investment here. Like 2 is just sucking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Sucks resources. Once you get past 2, I think.
Yep. Put them to work.
Well, yeah, because we take care of each other. That's the thing too. Well, and we're in batches actually. So there's the first batch of us 3, and then there's the second batch of 3.
The Texas batch. Yeah.
So so we take the first batch takes care of the second batch. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. And he refers to his siblings as like cookies or something like that.
Cookies?
Well, batches.
Batches.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. I like it. I think it helps me. It helped me understand that. How old are the older 3 batch and then the younger 3 batch?
And the first batch it's going to be 18, 16, and 14, I think. And then there's a 7-year gap. And then there is 8 because he's 10 years younger than me. So 8, and then it's 6.
Yeah, 8,
6,
and 5.
and then 5.
Yeah.
I think so. I think that's
so. Wait, were you thinking you were done with kids, and then you're just like, no, we're not done, or?
It kind of, we weren't trying or not trying, and it just seemed like we couldn't have kids anymore. And then,
then when you moved down,
when we moved, we just started having kids again. I had something in the air, maybe
freedom.
Texas freedom, or freedom does something to your blood or something.
Yeah.
How old were you when you had your 6th child?
6. Let's see, 5. 42. See.
Okay, I'm 42.
42.
Oh.
Okay, there you go.
Lynn,
you're all set. And with that, we shall wrap.
Yeah, I don't have that kind of podcast.
So tell everybody where they can find you. I know you have a couple different destinations, and I don't think many people are aware of your homesteading channel.
A lot of people aren't. That one's called Off-Grid-ish Living. Like it's off-grid-ish living. And then Allison Morrow. I mean, if you look up my name, Allison Morrow, anywhere, you'll find me on Rumble, YouTube. I'm on Locals, Rockfin, all the big sites. Yeah. And then, you can get as much or as little as you want. I will say, YouTube, I'm still tweaking it, though. I don't know why. It's this abusive relationship that I wish I could get out of, but
we're aware.
I don't do my full streams a lot of times on YouTube because it's funny because even when I tell people ahead of time before we go live, please, while we're live on YouTube, we'll cut the stream and we'll do the full stream somewhere else. But like while we're live on YouTube, like just know these are the rules that are going to get us taken off the internet. So like, please just talk in code or like, we'll talk about the other stuff after. And then it's like 3 seconds into the podcast, they're just like, this kills you. And I'm like, okay, I'm not doing this live anymore. I'm going to just record these and I'll just put 5 minutes on YouTube. I'm not doing this anymore because I have been suspended. Actually, I don't know if you guys knew this. One of the doctors that I had on, because I started focusing on censorship during COVID. Before I was just kind of doing news analysis. And actually before that, I was just doing Airstream renovation because we had an Airstream that we're renovating. It was totally non-controversial. But like when COVID hit, I was kind of like, okay, I got to tell people how little we know so that they understand they should not be making life-changing decisions based on what they're seeing on the news. And so that's how I got into the world of censorship. And of course, then the censored people during COVID were highly trained medical professionals and scientists. And so this Dr. Aaron Cariotti, who came on in 2021, who was suing the University of California over their vaccine mandate because he had COVID. He said he had natural immunity. He didn't want to get the vaccine. And so there was this lawsuit. I happened to see him, in a local news article. And so I invited him on. Well, YouTube took down that video, said it was medical misinformation. I had to go on Twitter to tell everybody that I did not, first off, violate their rules. And this is ridiculous. This guy's a medical ethics professor at the University of California. He's a doctor. He should be able to talk about his lawsuit. And at the time, my day job, because I had quit TV, my day job that I never talked about behind the scenes was working at the Department of Natural Resources, which is the wildfire fighting agency in Washington State. And I was shooting wildfire videos for them and editing them, like basically interviewing firefighters about their job. Gotcha. And like cleaning up forests from, all the debris and everything and the overgrowth that's been allowed over the last, few decades. So they saw that tweet and they were like, what is Allison doing? Because they knew I had a podcast. And they hired me because I had a social media following. It wasn't that I had a podcast that was a problem, but they didn't know I had started interviewing doctors and scientists about COVID. And they didn't like that content, So they told me that if I wanted to maintain my employment, I had to quit these interviews because they had a vaccine mandate. They had a vaccine mandate, and they said that I was undermining their mandate. And so I refused. They fired me. Got me fired. Got me ripped. Yeah, it's going to the Supreme Court. Well, now they got kicked back to the Fifth Circuit, but yeah, it's in Missouri v. Biden, which I found out about like 5 months ago that it's in the Missouri v. Biden case, and like we're going to the Supreme Court, so that's pretty cool. Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh, let's pause real quick for our sponsor. I've almost forgot our sponsor.
Yeah. All right, here we go.
Would you like to establish a privatized banking system that will help you separate from the mainstream banks and get more control over your money? Join a growing community of families, business owners, pastors, and churches, yes, even churches, that are learning to establish and manage a privatized banking system and enjoy the safety of guaranteed tax-free growth perpetuated by the amazing power of uninterrupted compound interest. Don't wait for the next crash. Contact Private Family Banking. They are here to help fuel the future of the family and the church with multi-generational wealth building. See our contact information in the show notes below, or just email us at banking@privatefamilybanking.com.
All right. Also, if you want to get Chuck's free ebook, you can check the link down below, and you can reach out to Chuck there. And we really want to thank you, Allison, for taking the time and coming on and telling a little bit more of your story. And for all y'all that want to follow Allison and her family on their homestead adventure, we'll put the links to that in the show notes as well. And Matt, did you have any other questions or anything that you wanted to talk about?
No, not that I know of. Also, I just wanted to let everybody know on the podcast, if you don't know already, we will be shutting down all of the products, pretty much all of them, all the products on the texasboys.com. We are not out of stock on certain products. So if you would like to go get some last minute items over there, you can. But I think the only product we are going to be selling on there will be the beef and pork, and then but that'll be only for local pickup, and then also our CBD coffee and Lion's Mane coffee.
And we might continue to carry the 1 pounders of the
and
honey,
possibly 1 pounder honey.
We're still working through all that. We're trying to figure out what we can cram into our schedule.
Yeah.
That's all part of that. But
yeah.
Allison, did you have any parting thoughts or anything that you wanted to leave our subscribers with?
I know. I just really appreciate that you all had me on. It's really fun to visit with you guys. I love what you're doing too. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we always love being on your show. So if you think of any cool ideas, always don't hesitate to reach out. And
one topic for you all, which I'm doing tomorrow with another guest, is I found this Atlantic article. Somehow I missed it a few months ago, called "How Rural America Steals Girls' Futures."
Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah. It's all about how rural America ruins little girls, takes away all their freedom.
Huh. I think my wife would love to have that conversation.
That'd be great.
Yeah, she would enjoy that.
All right. Well,
All right, y'all. So thank you so much for another episode of the Fearless Podcast. And remember, stay fearless, my friends.